with the Retro Hour podcast, and we're joined today by eXo. And eXo is a dev of, you may have heard of eXoDOS or similar eXo projects. They're really making emulation a lot easier. I remember years ago trying to configure stuff, having to do it manually in a notepad form and kind of, get your emulators to work perfectly, tweak them, but also try to get them to run on the hardware that you had. eXo is really helping people, break out of that, get into stuff that they've never had before, and also get some extra info and documentation on them and really help preserve and celebrate these games. So how are you doing, eXo? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Pretty excited. We got some big releases coming up here.
Yeah, we've been chatting on Discord, and a big shout to Dave Velociraptor as well for actually hooking us up, because we covered eXoDOS in one of our news stories recently, and that was my first exposure to the project. But I was wondering what your first exposure to video games was. This is a question we always ask our guests.
Yeah, I grew up, we didn't have a lot, and I remember seeing arcades when I grew up. We had a little place called Peter Piper Pizza that was kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese, but they didn't have the dancing animatronics. And they'd have a really small arcade in the back. And there was this, I think the first arcade I ever played was called Noah's Ark. And it was this, you had to get two of each animal and move them up to the top. And it was like a child-sized cabinet. So probably, 3 feet tall. And that's the first time I ever played a game. And it's just stuck in my mind. And it wasn't until years later, we got an NES in the house. And, actually, I take that back. We had a Magnavox Odyssey 2, the one with the big keyboard. And there was Sub Chase on there. You had a little plane that went across the top and a sub across the bottom. And you one guy controlled one guy controlled the other. And you got one chance to fire a shot every time you pass by, and you try to hit the other guy. And it was just this repetition. But, it went way back to there. And it was really when I found computers is when I really lighted up on it, because suddenly it felt like an NES game or an Atari game. It felt like I knew what the boundaries were going to be before I played. There was only so many variations of games for those systems, but a computer felt like, even if it was a text adventure, it could be anything. You could go anywhere.
Well, talk us through your first computer then. What was it? And you remember why you chose or got that system then? What's kind of the story with it?
Yeah, it was an AT&T 6300. It had a 10 megabyte hard drive. It was green monochrome. So you had your 3 colors of green and your black. No mouse. So you had to do everything on keyboard. And it was so that computer was made in 85. It was given to me in 92. And so this was an 808.6 machine. It actually was an 808.6 with a 808 coprocessor on top of it. By 92, you had 486 machines out. You had CD-ROMs out. You had Super VGA graphics out. So to have this machine with green screen, it's not very impressive, but it's all I knew at the same time. It was given to me because my father had passed away, and someone was like, this will keep him busy. And it really did. I was also given a 1200 baud modem with it, and the world of BBSs was, that was Narnia to me. I could log on every day and try to find something new. And I had limitations with my machine, the type of software I could play. But surprisingly, a lot of games that people were playing in EGA and VGA graphics did run in CGA. It just didn't look great. But if it's all you had, that's how you played it. I remember playing SimCity 1 on there, and I think back, how did I play that without a mouse? I did. Yeah. I was just keyboard, tap, tap, tap everywhere I went, and I got really good at it. But,
yeah.
I loved it.
Color was essential on that, wasn't it? To see the different industries. And
the color, the color helped. Yeah. So you had your little PC speaker, so everything was just, you didn't, a siren sounded the same as people cheering. And then, of course, the keyboard instead of mouse. So everything was kind of looked the same. It sounded the same, but it was still a blast to play.
I'm interested to hear a bit more about your BBS experiences as well, because I speak as someone I used to read about BBSs in magazines when I was a kid, but didn't have the money to afford phone bills and all that at the time. And really, it was like the World Wide Web by the time I properly got online. But what kind of BBS memories have you got then? What were you doing? Is there any boards that used to dial up, and anything stands out in your memories?
I had a dial list that was probably 30 deep. They were all local numbers, so I wasn't having to pay long distance charges. I grew up, at this point, I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so you had Apogee's board here, you had id Software's board. So when they did a shareware release, it was local. You got it quick. A lot of big boards here. Several of them had multiple lines, so you could chat with people on them. I lived for the door games, Legend of the Red Dragon and Wasteland, Pimp Wars. There was a million of them. And I mean, I'd line it up so I could log in at 11:30, play my turns, and then it would click to 12 and I'd get my turns for the next day. So I could do two. And then it was like, you logged off at 12:30 at night and you're like, well, now I got to wait 48 hours before I can play again. I would visit like family across the country and I'd be like, so do you mind if I look at the phone book, see if I can find a BBS to log into? Because it was just, what do they have here? What software might be different regionally here? It was like going to a flea market, but instead of buying a disc in a bag, you were logging into the files section to see what you could find. My first date I ever went on came from a bulletin board system. I met a girl that went to the middle school from down, like the other one across town from me. And she was on there and we were logged in at the same time. We went to the mall together and hung out. So bulletin boards were a social part of my life. They were, it was a lot of discovery. I ran my own little board for a while. I never had a ton of people, but it was more about the challenge of creating it and getting the door games running than it was about having a large dial-in group of people.
I think that's awesome. It sounds like you were doing a lot of cool stuff on there. And I was wondering, did you ever, download an emulator, and what your first experience of emulation was, and realizing that you can run another system on your system?
So the first emulators I ever played with, I didn't realize were emulators. There were quite a few 8086 games and 286 games that were just like Konami or Taito arcade games running in a wrapper that made it run on your computer, but it was really just what we would call a MAME-ROM today. The first time I became aware that I was emulating was, I think it was probably Nesticle. It was around 04, 05, and finding out that you could download an app to play Nintendo games on your computer, it felt crazy. And to see it running was, you get, to see this little box in the corner and it had my childhood running in it was crazy. And, I had 3 Nintendo games growing up, maybe 4 at one point. It was all about renting them on the weekend for me. The idea of having a folder that had 700 games in it and you could just flip through them, that was mind-boggling to me. Especially when you saw how big they were and you're like, oh wait, so for 10 megabytes or what is it, 7 megabytes, I've got the entire Nintendo library sitting here on my computer. That was also mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's like a mouse cursor on a modern machine. Yeah. Entire library. Yeah, it's insane.
A single MP3 file is bigger than the entire NES library.
Well, when did you get into programming then? What's kind of the story there? Because obviously you're playing the games. When did you discover development then? And what's kind of your background there?
I would hesitate to call myself a programmer by any means. I do a lot of scripting. I do write a little bit of Visual Basic. When you look at my projects, they're held together with what modern day people would probably call bubble gum and tape, but it's batch files. I got really good at batch file scripting back when I was making BBSs and working on that AT&T computer. Since all my friends had Windows machines, I was on DOS. And so I got good at the prompt, and then I got good at batch scripts. And the batch scripts you can do a lot with. And so if you look at all the framework that runs the eXo projects, it's just running in standard old batch. You can take it, and as long as you still have DOS 6.2, most of it runs over there just fine. And so there are people who take some of my DOS projects and just put it on regular hardware, and they're able to run a lot of it straight without, my themes come up and the colors work in the batch menus and the little loops run. And so I do a lot of scripting, and it all came down to in college, I wanted to build one of those MAME arcades. So I went and I found a guy locally that had a Ninja Turtles 4-player cab for sale for like $100, and it was beaten up. And I took that and I set up MAME on it. And then it became, I want to get the other emulators running. So I kind of relied on that batch scripting I had done growing up and was able to get, this was before you had things like Launchbox and Hyperspin that made it all super fancy. You kind of had to do it very manually. You wanted to run a 3DO game, you had to find a way to pass that variable over when you clicked on it. So I learned there. And ironically, then my job went really far with that scripting. So in my professional life, I was automating for a living, and it kind of became like a Mobius strip. I was automating for my hobby, which made me better at it. And then that got me a really good career in automation. And then I learned new things doing that. And I was able to bring that back to my hobby and do better there. And so because I was doing the same thing in two different spaces of my life, I just kept improving.
I think that's really interesting. You know, you mentioned batch scripts there, and you brought back memories of me doing very naughty stuff with bats back in the day. And I was just thinking it's a very like unique Windows user kind of DOS based thing, isn't it? Where this idea of scripting and playing around with a game, modifying it and editing it comes from. Do you think if you were, using another system, maybe, an Apple system or something, or you wouldn't have kind of gone down that route?
Yeah, I think that the whole reason I'm where I am is because I was given an AT&T 6300 in 1992. Had I not been given that machine, had I been given a much more modern machine, I probably wouldn't have learned the scripting. I also think that time period, if you look at like the Doom WAD community, you look at just the homebrew community back then, part of the challenge of doing preservation of games at that time is a very small percentage was commercial.
Yeah.
A lot of what people were downloading on these bulletin boards, and that's the main distribution back then, were homebrew games. And, it wasn't uncommon to have a friend in high school who was making a game or making a level for a game or modding someone else's game to make something out of it. And that mentality, I think, carried over. It was the idea.
And that ability to kind of take games apart and like look at all the different elements and just mess about with them. I remember changing a lot of levels in Road Rash on the PC and stuff like that, just playing around with our friends. I was wondering then, like, can you explain to listeners what the kind of basis of the eXo project is then, what it's designed to do?
Yeah, so the motto I live by for my projects is preservation through playability. There's a lot of great resources out there that are doing preservation work, like the Strong Museum, and I'm really glad they exist. However, the flip side of that is if there's a movie I really want to watch, and I know that the Smithsonian has it, but I can't get to it to watch it, that doesn't do me a lot of good. My projects, the idea of them is I want the actual on-disk files to be original. I want really high quality copies of them, whether that's, disk dumps or original CD images. But I also want them in a format that someone can play without knowing DOS, without knowing DOSBox, without knowing the intricacies of any emulator for that matter. And then the other aspect is the ephemera of the metadata. All my projects come with front ends and you can browse. And I get more feedback from people that say they just go in and just spend all day looking at games and reading about games and looking at the extras than they do playing them. Because it's a database, and it's the most complete database as far as the DOS games go. So we're doing manuals. We're doing soundtracks if we can find them. If there were reference cards and tidbits inside the box, we want to capture all that. Maybe there was a commercial for it back in the day, or Software Etc. They ran a tape in the background that kind of like did promos for games coming out that year. We want to find that, and it's in there. Strategy guides, Prima guides, online websites that talked about it. Some adventure games had UHS, the Universal Hint System. We've captured those and put them in there. So the idea when you go to a game is you're not just, okay, I can play the game. I can see the commercials. I can read about the game. We capture magazines. We capture catalogs, books. We try to capture it all. So to go back to what you mentioned, the projects are preservation through playability, and that means preservation of all aspects of the game. And playability is, unfortunately right now, restricted to Windows. We do have a staff member who writes patches to try to make them work on Linux. It just requires a lot of work to do that. But they're portable. You can have it on an external drive. You stick it into any Windows computer. You hit play, it opens up, and you have a menu. And you go through, you pick whatever you want. We've done DOS, Windows 3X. We've got the Scum VM project. We have the Dream project, which is Aaron Giles' latest one on LucasArts games, which is amazing work. We've got one that's all based around just interactive fiction. So it's got
That's the retro learning project, isn't it? So, but it's like kind of ecosystem around an emulator then that has all the different elements and all these extras on top of it, and you're kind of giving people like not a skin, but kind of a access, something surrounding it, add-ons, extra accessibility and making it easier. Is that my kind of understanding correct? Or?
Yeah, it's like we try to approach it from a platform perspective. So if you download eXoDOS, the idea is you have 98% of the games that were created for DOS sitting in front of you ready to go. And I say 98 because the other 2% are things that we're looking for. They're hard to find. They've already been lost to a certain degree. So when you get eXoDOS, it's the idea of you have a very well curated assortment of DOS games in front of you. They work, they're playable, and they've preserved all of it's in DOS specifically, all of the weird things about them. You can buy a copy of King's Quest IV from a couple different websites online. However, it's going to run very standard. It's going to be with a Sound Blaster, and it's going to have the like, for example, King's Quest IV had an SCI version and an AGI version. You're going to get that later SCI version. When you start at eXoDOS, you're going to be asked, well, do you want the AGI one? Do you want the SCI one? Do you want Sound Blaster? Do you want Roland MT32? Does it have the sound canvas? What about the Tandy 3 voice, the Innova, the IBM music feature? We have over 11 different sound cards that we support. And as long as the game supports it, you have that option when you run it. All the original setup files are there and all the original driver files are there. So we're not stripping anything out. And like something like King's Quest IV will even have something like what we call the Ultimate Edition. That one we've taken the Amiga had these really amazing ambient sound effects in the background. Like there's waves crashing and there's seagulls crying. We've extracted that and it's running through the Gus soundtrack, the Gravis Ultrasound. So you're getting that added to the DOS version, but you're also getting the sound effects running through the Sound Blaster channel, and you're getting the music running through the MT32 channel. So you're getting kind of versions that you may not have even gotten back in the day, but you also have the ability to run that thing in CGA mode with PC speaker if you want.
But you can have the ultimate version if you want it, yeah, with all the best bits baked in, yeah. While you're talking about the interactive fiction one as well, eXoIF, I'm interested as well because I know a lot of these titles here. I mean, I'm looking at some of the games that this can run. It dates back to like 1974, and I know it emulates some mainframes as well. So, I mean, how's it been collecting information for those like really early systems, or are they well documented, or did it take quite a lot of digging to get that information?
Yeah, they're not documented very well at all. I've been very lucky. I've got a staff member, goes by G. Schmidl. He, a German fellow who loves interactive fiction, and he spent a good portion of the last 10, 20 years building up this amazing database on his personal computer. And when he heard me talking about some IF stuff one day, he popped up, and the pack wouldn't be possible without him. The first version we did emulates about 45 platforms. I then moved on to the next project. He kept going. Version 2 of eXoIF, which is getting pretty close to release. I think he's over 110 platforms emulated now. So yeah, you've got the ORIC mainframe all the way to a calculator that ran an IF game on it. It's amazing. And what it has done for us is if we decide we have someone show up and they're like, man, I'd love to see an EXO project based on a really esoteric system like the BBC Micro. Well, we've already got that running in eXoIF. So we have the framework for it. We've got the emulator running. We've got all the front-end files. All it would take is a curator coming in and locating the files and then making the metadata, and it's done. And that's been the big benefit is in the last year, I built out the framework in a way that people can come in and we have a demo scene project that came out this year. All those weird demo scene things that people were releasing back in the day. I've been asked about them for years, but they're incredibly tricky to run in emulators because they used things on the original hardware that you wouldn't normally emulate. That was the trick of demo scene, was doing things in unorthodox ways. And this fellow came along, Dutch Magic, and he took the framework and made the demo scene project with it. So the EXO projects have gotten to a point now where when people come in that want to work with them, I can help them by just executing the framework, and then they can build almost anything with it.
I was wondering how many people are on the team then. Is it like a big collaborative effort, and do people specialize in like certain areas?
I think I've got about 20 people right now on what I would call the core staff. Back in 18 or so, I started a Discord channel. At that time, I've been doing everything myself since about 2006. And the Discord really allowed a sense of community to form. And, now I have, one guy from Australia and one guy from Germany that I would consider kind of like my co-leads on everything. And then, it's amazing. Like every time we release a project, the section in my manual where I give credit just keeps getting bigger. And I love that. I love seeing how global the project is. We got people from Russia and Germany and France. It's a mistake to try to list them all, but to suffice to say, we have people from all over the world, and it really shows how global the interest is in not only in DOS, but just these games in general, these older games. It's also very generational. We have people that are my age, we have people that are much older than me, and we have people that are in their 20s that show up and they're like, man, I love this. My dad used to be into it. I want to help too.
I'm interested as well in kind of the legality or the morality of it as well. I mean, first thing I looked at when I searched eXoDOS in YouTube, the video came up, eXoDOS piracy or preservation. And then someone pointed out that actually only 3% of the games that you can get in eXoDOS are actually available commercially. So is that obviously that legal grey area? Abandonware is not technically a thing in most countries, but, Ravi and I have always been of the belief that this stuff needs preserving. If the companies are not going to do it, then it's down to the fans of the games to kind of take over that, I think. Where do you kind of stand on that then? And has there been any kind of issues with that, like in terms of legality?
I've been lucky. In the 20 years I've been doing this, I've never had any legal challenges come at me. I have had a lot of companies talk to me and support me. I've had developers send me their original files, reach out to me and say, hey, I've got my master disks, but I don't know how to run them on DOS. Will you take them? That's not to say that what I'm doing is 100% legal. Now, I try to mitigate my responsibility. I use decentralized torrenting. Nobody's downloading directly from me. What I'm providing are all the files that make it run, and then, the rest is out there. That said, yeah, the 3% figure is something I calculated at one point. When you have 8,000 DOS games and there are 300 of them that are actual commercial games, and out of that 300, like I think it's 180 you can find on like Good Old Games and Steam, you get down to about 3% of the games. And even that, though, is challenging because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm glad that Good Old Games exist. I want people to be able to buy these legally, and I want them to be out in that way. However, I've been asked before, why don't I take the games out that you can buy or put a link to the store and they can go get it there? And the challenge there is, like Good Old Games, while I'm glad they exist, they're not preserving the game. They take out the original setup file. Sometimes they'll take the soundtrack and they'll compress it to OGG or a lossy format sometimes. They'll take out drivers. So you can't run the MT32 on certain games. You have to go get those drivers first and then reconfigure it. The challenge there is, as the GOG version, especially being DRM free, and there's a lot of people sharing the GOG version online, it kind of becomes ubiquitous. And the original versions can disappear. And so it can be harmful to preservation when the copy you can find is actually a RIP. And that's unfortunately what a lot of GOG games are. So they're great for getting a game that runs in your system. You double click it, you got a nice, beautiful icon, and it runs in their galaxy. But it's still a RIP at the end of the day. It's not the original files with everything. So I'm not knocking them for that. I wish that I could work with them in a way that they would take my version and sell it. And then I'd be like, hey, that's great. Now you've got a preserver, and it would add like 100 kilobytes, and they'd have all the sound cards in there. And I think it would benefit everybody, because then people who are legally buying the game could have the Roland MT32 or, all these other great sound cards that most people have never heard what a Roland MT32 sounds like.
I was about to say exactly that. Like, the kind of GOG customer would be someone that's just wants to play like the old game on their new machine. Whereas, somebody with eXo would be looking at it going, oh, I want to try it with Adlib, or I want to try, different kind of setups and stuff from back in the days, and maybe get a bit more in depth for it. It's kind of like more purist with the way that it's presented, but then also those like new forms that you've talked about where they're kind of mixing, different soundtracks and stuff. Because one thing you mentioned there was the sound cards. How do you go about the process of choosing which hardware's going to actually be emulated well and accurately. And has there been some that you just like, no, we're not going to use that. That's not good enough to be used?
In general, the games, if it supported the sound card, we provide the option for it. If it sounds horrible, we'll put a note that says, okay, this game says it runs with the MT32 or the Game Blaster or the CMS, but it's going to be noisy. So that's not you. That's not your fault. That's just what you're going to get. Yeah. We've been amazed at how many games we found that released with broken drivers, like Magic Carpet by Bullfrog. It says it's an MT32 compatible game, but the driver was missing something in the header, so it wouldn't run. A genius that's part of our crew fixed that header, and we heard MT32 music in Magic Carpet for what may have been the first time. I don't know if anyone else had figured that out in the past, but if they had, it was not ever distributed as a patch online. We have found games that were released on a CD, and someone had copied the soundtrack to the CD in waveform. And so clearly the game couldn't play that. So we saw calls going out to the CD audio looking for sound, but nothing was playing. And we saw WAV files on the disc. So one of my guys took the WAV files, remastered the disc, made them Redbook audio, and we started this game up, and suddenly there was sound playing. So the publisher actually put the game out wrong. And so we fixed the sound, and now you actually have soundtrack there.
Which is great, because in those days, they couldn't patch the games easily. It meant sending out new physical versions to people, didn't it? So it's
especially if it was a soundtrack.
Well, sometimes a floppy disk in the box with a later release, like, oh, we're sorry,
Yeah, so we try to do as many sound types as we can. Sometimes if it just sounds horrible, we'll put a note at most, but we try to at least provide you the option.
Well, another thing that you support, not only audio, you also support things like the Real Magic MPEG card as well. And I've actually got a Real Magic card in my 486 PC behind me. Return to Zork, one of the games I played on there recently. There's a great version of Dragon's Lair on there as well. So tell us about, because that's an interesting era, I think, isn't it? Before PCs were powerful enough to use a CPU to decode MPEG when we needed these add-ons. And there was obviously a handful of games released for the Real Magic, and then other ones came on the market. So tell us a bit about supporting that then, and kind of what your experience of kind of that era of like the MPEG cards on the PC was.
That was a kind of a dream of mine to get that supported for a long time. And then we got real lucky that a fellow came along on the DOSBox forums and dug into it and made it possible for us. The hardest part about the Real Magic is there's not a lot of information about it. And at one point, they even changed how they spelled their name. It went from R-E-E-L to R-E-A-L.
Yes.
So there's different versions of the card depending on when it released. And they would put up these catalogs talking about all the games that were going to come out for it. And some just never materialized. So it becomes a game of like, all right, well, it was in the catalog, but we can't find it. So did it never come out, or is it just really rare? And every time one of these pops up that we hadn't found before, it's kind of like a mini party. Like, oh my gosh, there actually was a copy of that game for this. And it finally popped up, and, a guy in Czechoslovakia found it, and he's going to rip it for us. It is interesting that, DOS just didn't have the bandwidth on the throughput to make these really clear videos. So, Windows 3X comes out, and while it didn't, it's funny with Windows 3X because it didn't talk directly to the hardware layers. It had to use DOS to do that. So in some ways it was really slow and laggy, but the video compression was better on it because it had QuickTime. And so it's not really until Windows comes along that you have direct API access through DirectX that you can now have high quality FMV games without going really high compressed. So those Real Magic cards were, and it wasn't just computers, right? Like the CDI had an MPEG chip you could buy for it and stick it in. And now it would make your certain, full motion games look better in it. A couple pieces of hardware came out with MPEG
Saturn had one as well. And there are a few consoles with them.
With the 32X, when it was paired, with the 32X when it was paired with the Sega CD, made your FMV look a little better for the 5 games that supported it.
I was wondering then, like, have you seen any people using CRT outputs or anything like that? And, supporting those older video modes, how important is that, as well as, new high-res ones? Are you able to ramp it up to like 4K or anything like that with some of the outputs?
We try to be real careful with the scaling up because you can get all kinds of warping, especially going from 4:3 to widescreen. So we try to enforce aspect ratio It's possible to turn it off if you want to, but suddenly your Guybrush Threepwood is, instead of tall, he's really wide, right? Excuse me. The CRT modes tend to be really highly requested by a certain subset of people. And luckily, DOSBox Staging has done a really amazing job with something called Auto CRT. It can dynamically scale, and it looks at if it's an EGA game or a VGA game, and it scales based on the resolution that it should natively be. And you get a pixel perfect integer scaling while you get the lines added back in. Now, beyond that, we also have an auto launcher that allows you to do things like, if you want to curve the screen a little bit, look like the old CRT did, it'll add that effect. I think we got one that even puts a little glare up in the corner as if your light's on behind you. So there's all kinds of little fun ways you can play with the output. Now, from direct output, another type of video thing that we support is called CGA composite. There were some games that used monitors, and the phosphor blur allowed you to give the illusion that you had more than 4 colors on the screen at any given time. This emulates that. And so we've manually gone and found all these CGA composite games and added a launch option. So when it starts, you can say, I have an RGB monitor, or I want to emulate an RGB monitor. And you get those higher color looking CGA games like you would back in the day. But it's also very possible to take these games and run them on your original CRT monitor if you want, and then you can just turn off all the filters and you get it looking just like that.
We're talking about modern conveniences that we really appreciate today. Save games. Because, these games weren't always easy back in the day, and, I'm getting a bit older now. My reflexes are not maybe what they used to be when I was young. I mean, how are they implemented then, and how important do you think they are, and what kind of features does Exodus offer in terms of resuming games and saving your progress?
I just wanted to add, can Dan transfer some of his old save games that he was stuck on and try them out nowadays as well?
You can take your old save games and add them back to games and continue, as long as the version number is the same, which a lot of times it is, but occasionally it acts up. We do, we support within the game. If you quit out of a game and you want to take it off your machine or delete it, it'll ask you if you want to back up any changes you've made to that game. And if you choose yes, it all goes to a certain folder. If you copy that folder to anybody, you could zip it up and send it over, and someone else could pick up where you left off if they wanted to. Now, as far as save states go, that is not supported, and that has to do with the memory allocation way that DOSBox works. I know that DOSBox Pure has come out with save states, but it is somewhat unstable in certain ways. So we've opted to go with stability over that convenience. We know from there's the gold box games like AD&D, there's something called the all-seeing eye for Eye of the Beholder. And these are these auto mapping tools that were released back in the day that they run side by side to DOSBox. And as you're walking through the dungeon, it shows you in real time walking around. It shows your inventory, and you can, if you want, edit yourself while you're playing. I bring that up to say, because the second you change from DOSBox Staging to DOSBox X or vanilla DOSBox or Pure, those all break immediately, because every DOSBox emulator branch is putting things into different memory registries in different parts of memory. So anything that is memory dependent breaks the second you change the version of DOSBox you're in. And unfortunately, save states are 100% memory dependent, because it's just a snapshot of where the memory bits were at the exact time you hit that button. So if the base game's not loaded the same way, that's why DOSBox is notoriously not good at save states, because the variability in the memory loading.
I was wondering then, you mentioned you've got preservation there, you've got scans of stuff, strategy guides, code wheels even, and even video game, trailers and announcement stuff in there. Have you had any devs add in any of their stuff, like original notes or anything like that? And how do you compile all of these things if you've got a process of, going through scanning everything, getting it in a similar format?
I've been very lucky to have not only several developers reach out with original materials, but people who have worked with developers or representatives of developers. Recently, Al Lowe provided the high-quality Leisure Suit Larry 7 soundtrack, which is highly compressed on the disc. Yeah, he's really great. One of my other... he's been... I'll just say he's been very helpful, and he's a really wonderful guy. He really supports preservation and the idea of capturing these things. So we have people like that, providing data. And then what we do is we have a GitHub. And that GitHub, instead of being a code repository, is an actual data repository. So it links to a Synology that the team shares. And I've got, 2 or 3 guys that just work manuals. And I've got other guys who do extras. I've got one guy who has a volunteer team that just takes 30-second videos of every single game so we can have a little 30-second snapshot movie the same way you would have for a lot of the consoles. Nobody's done that for DOS before, or these computer systems. And that GitHub kind of tracks everything that gets added. And then I come along every few months or so and I look and I'm like, all right, we're going to push 300 new manuals into the project. And we're going to push, this guy found 5 new soundtracks. And that allows everything to kind of get cataloged. And then I add it to make sure that the metadata is consistent through all of these projects. And, I love Moby games, but the way one guy might catalog a game is different than the way another guy might catalog the game. And one thing about the eXoDOS projects is I've pretty much done the metadata on every single game except for a handful. I've got one other guy I've been training up that's doing an amazing job at it. But by keeping it just to me and one other guy, it's consistent. All the games that are mystery games are thematically linked that way. And so we do the same with all the extras that you're talking about. We make sure that they all get named in a consistent manner and added in a consistent manner. And then we have this amazing plugin that a guy named Timber wrote, and it adds all these dynamically to the front end. So when you right click any game, you'll see like English extras pop up at the bottom, and everything in that folder that you can find for that game is dynamically being listed there.
I was just going to say as well, another thing is you mentioned English there as well. Language packs as well. You must have support for multiple languages in there, and different resources that came out for those regional versions.
Yeah, language packs were asked for a long time, and I had kind of stayed away from it because I felt like if I don't speak the language, how can I properly curate it? And how can I represent it properly? Luckily, I have a large contingent of German staff members, and they said, "Okay, we're gonna make a German pack." And then I also have another amazing staff member who put a lot of work into getting the French pack kind of background, and so we haven't released the French one yet, but it's coming along really nicely. The French and the German guys came up with a great framework, and then we were able to take that. And just recently, a fellow came along and said, "Hey, I'd love to do a Spanish pack." And so we bring him in, we train him up, we get in the framework, and then a few months later he comes along, we test it out, boom, done. We have a Spanish language pack now. Another fellow on staff did a really great Eastern European one. It's Czechoslovakian, Slavic, and Polish. And there's some really cool, unique games in these languages that never came out for English, especially the Germans and the Eastern Europeans love point-and-click adventure games. And so, as we get these going, as they become more popular and they become found again, you start seeing them pop up over in Scum VM with an English translation. And that allows a lot more people to enjoy these games than they could have before.
In terms of the wider preservation effort, have any organizations or museums approach you for help?
I have a pretty great relationship with Frank Cifaldi over at the Video Game History Foundation. He has provided discs to me in the past for DOS when they couldn't get them loaded up over there. When I get magazine scans he may not have, I get them over to him. So just we have a really good open communication. I had one developer who was concerned. He wanted his stuff to be preserved, but he didn't know what the legality of it looked like. And he was kind of hesitant to just kind of hand it all to me and say, "Hey, take over my legacy." And honestly, I've had some devs do that. And, they've kind of put me in the will and said, like, when I go, the rights go to eXoDOS. And then I'm basically not going to sell that stuff. It's going to be free for everybody at that point. In this case, this one guy wasn't sure what to do. And I don't have a lot of, money for legal stuff. So I talked to Frank over there, and they got their guys involved, and their lawyer came and talked to him. And they're hammering out this amazing deal with this guy so that these really kind of niche war simulations he was working on can be preserved in a way that he can still make money off them while he's alive. But once he's not, they'll step in and they'll become preserved, and it's all handled and buttoned down and dotted, so he doesn't have to worry about it. And someone else isn't going to come along and take his work and suddenly try to sell it and profit off of him. So that's a good example of a relationship I've got with those guys. There's a lot of people that talk to me, and it's a little under the table because of the concern about piracy. They don't want to be marked by it. So I've got a lot of devs and even publishers that have come to me and said, "Hey, we love your work, here's what we have in our archives for you. Please scan it and add it. Just don't say where you got it from. And it's that I get it. They have to, it's a corporate world and you got to be careful and you got to be, I'm willing to take that risk myself because if I don't, who will? And with current law, if we wait 99 years, I've got floppy disks sitting over here that were made 15 years ago that don't work anymore, 20 years ago that don't work anymore.
Yeah.
The CDs that came out in 95 right now are now reaching 30 years. And that's about the lifespan of an optical disc. If there's been any damage to it, any extra sunlight, too much heat, they're falling apart. So we don't have the luxury of waiting for that to catch up to us. So again, you asked me, do people work with me? They do. And they've been very helpful. And, while I haven't had anyone come at me from a legal standpoint, I have to imagine that's partly because we're also trying to treat these things with respect, and we're not out there selling this stuff. We're not trying to make a profit off of it. And I've seen that it tends to be the legal issues arise when someone is selling it, and when you see Nintendo come along when someone is selling access to their ROMs on a website. And not that they'd be happy with anyone giving their stuff away, but you're really putting yourself in the crosshairs the second you start monetizing someone else's copyright.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one thing we were talking about with culture, but around DOS was, LAN parties. And we had a little chat before this where we were talking about, some of the games that we played. Battle for Middle-earth was one. And then you mentioned that you played Theme Hospital multiplayer, which I think sounds like one of the coolest things ever. I'd love to have a hospital fight off. But I was just wondering how it works then with multiplayer games and what kind of support you have there.
Yeah, when you start to pack up, there's a dynamic playlist. And so when you go to playlist, you can see all kinds of, you want to see all the Gravis ultrasound games, there's a list for that. Roland MT32, and one of them is a remote multiplayer. So we've taken the old IPX connection of how you would play on a LAN, and I've got a script out there. And when you start that game up, it says, do you want to play single player or multiplayer? If you choose multi, you can then get to pick if you want to be the host or join. If you pick host, it tells you what your IP is, both local and wide area. And anybody can join you. Doesn't matter where in the world they are. We did a Doom match one time with a guy from Australia, France, America, and Germany all playing against each other. And it looked like it was on a LAN. It was a lot of fun. And so you give that IP out and anyone who wants to join you types it in. At that point, because there was no standardization back in the world of DOS games, it'll tell you, okay, step by step. You're going to start the game up. You're going to click on this. You're going to click on that. Make sure if you're the host, you're going to choose your color now and set the map and then click OK when you're ready. And for the joining guy, give him a different set of instructions. Here's exactly what you're going to do. It'll tell you how many people each game can play right on the front end. It can be anywhere from 2, all the way up to, I think we have 16 on one game. And most of it's through IPX, but I've also emulated null modem connections for the serial port games back in the day. And we've got one crazy one. Sock with Camel. It was an old CGA game with a little airplane that went, and you could do little barrel rolls. And that one had a definitive version that came out in like an 87 that could play on a Novell network. And 2 guys could take their Sock with planes and fly at each other. And we got that working. And it's so much fun to see this really old late 80s game playing in a multiplayer environment.
I love that. And I can imagine people, streaming matches and stuff of playing against each other in like virtual LANs. I think that's so cool. Yeah.
What about stuff like user generated content then? Is there an effort to preserve that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we've done it with the most popular games so far. So Doom, Descent, ZZT, and the other one it comes to me off the top of my head is Unlimited Adventures, which was an AD&D kit you could make your own little campaign with. With Doom and Descent, we've gone through and we find a community. Like in the case of Doom, there's Doom World, and they voted the top 10 WADs for every year from 93 or 94 up to 2003. And so I went and took all 100 of them and made them playable in Doom. There's a small, I think 8 that didn't run in vanilla Doom. You had to have a source port. So it'll tell you this one won't run in vanilla, but at the time you start it, it will let you run source port instead, and you can play them all that way. Some are WAD, some are total conversions. Like one of my favorite is in, I think 95, there was an Aliens total conversion. And now that the Doom Marine is an alien, or the bad guys are aliens, the zombies are aliens, and Doomarine has got his big, if there's mech loaders that are walking around, all the weapons have changed. There's a Batman one where you throw little, batarangs at people. I felt it was really important to capture this because, yeah, Doom is an icon in the world of PC gaming. It's synonymous with PC gaming, Doom, with DOS gaming specifically. But unless you grew up back then, and we talked about the bulletin board systems earlier, talk about dial-up, most people I knew played Doom for a week, maybe two. And then it was the WADs after that. It was all about finding levels and finding, adding a Simpsons pack. So every time you shot someone, you heard Bart say something, right? Like finding these things felt so fun back then. So we try to find that. We've got the top 100 best WADs. We have a hand-picked selection of my favorite and the staff's favorite. We've got some weird little Easter egg ones. Like there was a game called The 11th Hour, and one of the developers hid a WAD file on the disk of the Staff mansion. So the mansion you walk through in the game is a Doom level because he was a Doom, modder in his free time. So we've got that in there. In Frisco, Texas, there's the National Video Game History Museum, and a guy built their entire museum in Doom. And so we've got that WAD in there, and you can go walk to the video game museum in Doom. So, and then with, the same with Descent, we found their community, let the community tell us what they thought the best games were. With ZZT, there's a ZZT museum. And that's a weird little ASCII game, top down text, but there's thousands of maps for it. Some of them are really creative. So that's in categories. There's basic ZZT worlds, and there's ones that do things with the engine that you wouldn't think they could do. So unique ZZT worlds. And Unlimited Adventures has 240 D&D campaigns that were user created. The only thing that stops us from adding it is knowing what to add. I'd love to add a Duke 3D pack, but there's surprisingly little online about Duke 3D user-created worlds. There's not a museum. There's not a Hall of Fame. So knowing what to add is the hardest part. Not finding it. There's tons of content out there.
Do you go through beta versions as well as stuff? Because I was thinking, some games later on, mods became full titles in their own right as well. So, seeing the development of those through mods and then going into different beta versions and then the final release. We
do keep alternative versions of games when there is a difference that is visible to the user. The most obvious of that would be you had games in the 90s that were released both on floppy and CD-ROM. And the CD-ROM maybe added cutscenes or voice. So we want to have both of those options for people. Now, with something like Doom, you got to be careful because there's 19 versions of Doom that were released. And if I put that on the menu when you start it up, that's an avalanche of options. And it's going to create almost choice paralysis for some people. I don't know which one to pick. So we'll put the original one in, the first release. And then we'll put in maybe the first one that went out that was really popular. And then we'll put out the final release. So we'll try to narrow it down to the most meaningful of the versions. That way we do get a spread, but we're also not just burying the user in, especially Sierra games, right? Sierra would put out 20 copies of King's Quest 2 or 3. And we want the first one that had all the Easter eggs in it. And we want the last one that was bug patched, but they took all the Easter eggs out of.
Yeah, I found, one thing you've got eXo with 3.x support as well. And I found later on when you're getting into the kind of Windows 95 and further areas, support for games was pretty hard because every version of Windows that would come out, it would either break something, a patch would get introduced and stuff like that. So I was wondering, do you have any plans in that kind of area?
So I do have eXoWin9x, which is a Windows 3X pack. It's a little dated at this point because it's one of my older ones. I made it back in 2015. And then I did a brief update, I think in 2022 to get it to my new framework. I've got thousands of hours put into the next release of it. Sitting to my side here, I have 4,000 Windows 3X games that have not been preserved before. And when I say games, the term might be a little loose. Windows 3X was known for a lot of multimedia PC CD-ROM, so it could be My Family Chinese Cooking. It could be the art of fly fishing.
Or
there's a lot of crazy
as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of really great material in there, but you're right. It's very picky. It's incredibly picky. We've been trying to crack the Windows 9X egg for a long time. It's something that is difficult to do because you don't want to duplicate the operating system every time you put a game out. But if at that point, If there's 10,000 9X games out there and you duplicate the operating system every time, you're talking about terabytes of duplicate data. That's just the operating system, not even the games. And that's going to be a hard sell if I say eXo9x is out, guys. It's only 18 terabytes. Have fun. I've made something for nobody at that point.
And we've got this many versions of DirectX as well that all do different things,
QuickTime.
Yeah.
QuickTime is one of my banes with the Windows 3X. Because this game needs QuickTime 2. This one wants 2.1. This one wants 1.8. I've had games that pack QuickTime on the disk, and it's not the version that's compatible with the game. So you have to edit the disk to take out the version they released with to put your own in.
Well, talking of challenges, have there been any kind of oddities or any games that were really difficult to get running and complete?
The irony is, if a game is hard to get running, it's probably horrible. And so, like they're never the popular ones. We've got one called Backroad Racers. It was released by Revel, the model kit company. So you could buy a little, Mustang model kit, and it was a CD-ROM included with it. And you could race your little model cars around on these tracks. But it actually has a surprising amount of content on it. It's got FMV cutscenes where like if a cop pulls you over, he comes up to your window and talks to you. Getting that game running took almost a month of daily work. And me and 2 or 3 other people. One of the developers of DOSBox was involved in this. 2 staff members. I mean, we were daily trying to crack the code on this thing. And when we finally got it running, it was this like sense of relief. And also, no one's ever going to boot this game and play it. Like, unless I call it out and tell people how crazy it was, no one's just going to be browsing the list and say, oh, cool, I'm going to check that one out. I find it to be most rewarding when we find an issue in a game that just hadn't been caught yet. Ravenloft, Strahd's Possession, I believe. The good old GOGS version was based on the budget release. The budget release was the first CD version of the game. And when they mastered it, there were spaces in the file names. And so it added underscores, and this broke a lot of the cinematics. Well, that just meant you didn't get cinematics for most of the game. But when you beat the game, it would crash because it couldn't play the final cinematic. If you looked at the Good Old Games forums, there was people complaining about this. And hey, guys, you're selling a game we can't beat. One of my guys figured it out. He looked at the names and was like, well, I wonder. And so he went and fixed the naming and remastered the disc. And we played it. And suddenly there was an opening cinematic. So we played all the way through the game, and we saw the ending. And we released that, and we hyped it up and said that we did it, guys. We solved it. And about a week later, Good Old Games fixed their copy. And so that made me feel really great because that meant that got out there to everybody. And it wasn't just us doing it in our small corner of Discord. This is something that benefited everybody who's bought that game and downloads it again from here. So, sometimes it's the things we fix that we take it for granted. It's just always been that way. But like the CD earlier that had the soundtrack, but it was encoded the wrong way. The games that just won't run, a lot of times it's like the Backroad Racers game. And when we get it running, and then it just goes into obscurity, and I forget about it because I'm never going to want to play that again.
Nice for completionist's sake, though, isn't it? Just to have it working and running, yeah.
As long as it's not running, it's something I lose sleep over. I go to bed at night thinking, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow to get it running?
Well, in terms of who can access these games, because recently we've seen quite a move in terms of gamers kind of moving away from Windows due to Windows 11 and the rise of Linux gaming. I mean, does it run on other operating systems? I mean, any plans to do a Mac version? What's kind of the required software at the moment? Yeah,
we do have a Linux patch. It does require, by its nature, Linux is picky in terms of the exact flat packs have to be loaded or it's not compatible. We've got a staff member who has spent hours and hours and hours converting all of my Windows batch scripts into bash scripts and, writing conversions because Linux is case sensitive, but Windows is not. And so suddenly you might have Q files loading up bins that in Windows, they don't match case, but it doesn't care. Linux cares a lot. So we do have that for Linux, and it works in the Steam Deck. So it's possible to run Exodus on Steam Deck, but you also run into the problem at this point of some games just don't play well keyboard. It's going to be difficult to pull out a full-on flight sim, like a Jane's Combat Flight Simulator, and play that with 3 or 4 buttons when it was designed to have a whole keyboard array in front of you.
I was wondering, like, smaller hardware. Well, actually, it's not that small anymore. The Raspberry Pi. Would that be a good device to start running stuff on? And would there be more support for like things like that?
Yeah, the challenge with Raspberry Pi, Macintosh, all of these is we have EXODOS running in very specific builds of DOSBox, not just DOSBox vanilla 7.3. And that means the comp file that tells DOSBox how to run is tailored for that build. So if I go load up a version of DOSBox on the Mac, or a version that has been ported over to the Raspberry Pi, if it's not the exact same build, it doesn't read the comp file the same. And so the game might start, it might not. Or maybe it starts, but there's no sound, because to get all these crazy sound cards running, I'm using pretty specialized builds and drivers to do that. That's the challenge. Also with the Raspberry Pi, I think you would run into a little bit of processing issues. DOS goes all the way to 99. And while there were not a lot of games in that era, there were a couple. And a lot of them supported 3DFX, which we support as well. And even up to like 5 years ago, a high-end computer could stutter sometimes if you set your resolution too high and you turn 3DFX on and you ran a game like Carmageddon or Redguard, which Bethesda games are notoriously not really well optimized. And Redguard is a good example of one of those. Amazing game, but it really takes every inch of your PC power to run that thing.
Especially with all the different graphics cards and stuff like the Voodoo as well, which I love seeing support for and stuff. I was just wondering then what you have planned next. What's going to come out, and is there another system that you're going to be focusing on, or a new area?
There's always something about to come out. My personal project right now is getting the next version of Windows 3X out. In the past year alone, we've more than doubled the number of projects we have because of that framework that we have now. With Demo Scene, eXo, Interactive Fiction, both came out this year. Updates to ScumVM came out this year. Another one comes out soon with them. We do have more platforms on the horizon. At this point, we're only limited by the number of people we have and the number of hours in the day. I do have a very large project releasing on the 22nd of this month, so probably pretty quickly after this airs. And then there's a follow-up coming out, another project releasing in December. And they haven't been announced yet, so I can't talk about them quite yet, but they're super exciting projects. They're going to bring a lot of new eyes in because it's games that are notoriously difficult to run currently.
Well, there is actually a physical version as well that people can get hold of, which I thought was very cool, a good throwback. So tell us a bit about that, and also how do people get hold of the regular version of it then if they don't want to go down the physical route?
Yeah, so the regular version, like all the projects, 100% free. If you go to retro-exo.com, we've got links to all the projects there, the language packs, the add-on packs. It's all there. It runs through torrent systems. There's links to our community profile over at Discord. Now, we do have a collector's edition box that we sell. It doesn't include the games. You can get a hard drive with it, though, that you can then put the project on if you'd like. We created this as a way for people that wanted to support the project, because it does get expensive buying all these games to preserve. But a lot of people just kept coming to me saying they just wanted something physical to show on their shelf. It's kind of hard to see, but behind me right there, we've got EXODOS 4 and 5 sitting on the shelf back there. And then way next to them, there's 6. They're neat little boxes. They have these custom, I made like a custom coin that comes in them. They've got manuals, they've got catalogs, and the catalogs are kind of a joke, it goes through the years.
Wasn't there a Peter Molyneux sticker as well in one of them? Yeah.
We had a box get completely misprinted, and it was upside down and backwards. And I was like, what am I going to do? I've got like 500 of these. And so we got the correct boxes in, and I was like, what am I going to do with the wrong box? So we printed up these holographic stickers that say the Peter Molyneux edition. And if you buy for like $10, you can throw on this misprinted backwards flat box that has a sticker on it. That was my ode to Bullfrog and their unpatched games that they loved to release back in the day. And it comes from love. I love Bullfrog games, but man, they were unpatched when they came out.
I think that's awesome. And, I think it's something that all of our listeners can really use. And it's something that also seems like a huge rabbit hole. You could just dive in there and kind of get lost. We could talk to you for another hour about this and still only scratch the surface. So thank you for coming on, EXo, and just the work you've done is bonkers, and all of your team. And as it builds up, I hope you're going to have this great resource for preservation and keep all these games alive.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. The stories that I get from people, the nostalgia stories, are really what make it worth it the most. We got one staff member who used to play these games with his father. And when his father found out he was involved in preserving these things, that meant a lot to him. And he's older now. His health could be waning. And so they're kind of replaying some of these games together again. And knowing that this has it plays any small part in that I love the preservation side of it. It's a huge motivator for me, but the human side of it is my favorite aspect of it. I spend a lot of time on the Discord. I chat all the time, probably more than I should, but there's so many great people on there telling stories about the things that they love about these games and the things that brought them back to it. And why are people still talking about certain games 30 years later? And why are they interested in playing them again if they've already played them before? Especially when there's hoops you got to jump through, and it doesn't look as nice as a new game. And there's all these, and there's a reason why. And it's because they spoke to us on a very primal level. And I love when somebody comes on there and says, oh my gosh, I forgot that game existed, and it unlocks a core memory and they get to experience again. So that the project itself is its reward for me. The people that love it add so much more to it. I really appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to talk about it. It's definitely a passion of mine. I could talk about it forever. And so thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, it was a great point to end on. EXo, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us.
Thank you.